We are here to talk about the movie The Night House, and we have with us screenwriters Ben Collins and Luke Pietrowski. They are known for the film, or at least I knew them from the film Super Dark Times, which I really enjoyed. And so we're here to talk about The Night House, which releases on July 16th. So first, thank you to the Knicks group for hosting this event, and I'm very, very excited. So I think we'll just kind of start with first, I mean, I feel like in this time we have to ask this question of everybody, but how, as a creative team, have you guys been handling the pandemic, and has it changed your writing at all? And we're going to get that out of the way and then no more talk about it.
That's a really good question that I don't know that anyone has asked us that, Luke.
I'm really that. It certainly evolved, because when you went from like, okay, we're going to be down for like 3 weeks, it's that thing of like, well, I'm just going to take 3 weeks off. Like, this is so stressful that I'm just going to like kind of like say, we're just going to take this time and play video games and hang out with the kids and bake bread and all that. Then when like week 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, it's like, well, I guess I better like write a spec, because Hollywood's not really, the gears aren't moving. So you get really motivated of like, well, I'm going to just do something for me now and use this time creatively. And then, nope, this is not going anywhere. So, I mean, Ben has pointed out, and I'll let you speak to it, Ben, but it's been a little bit frustrating for us as professional writers, because our part was the only thing that could be done. So you get kind of endless development, because it's like, well, we can't really do any shooting yet. So, but we do. Everybody's feeling the strain about halfway through to like, okay, we need to get busy again. What can we do? Let's bug the writers and give them more notes, kind of just because we can't really move on to the next thing. So let's just poke and prod. And so it's been a little bit weird and different in that way. I don't know if you have anything.
Well, it's like, and I think like, yeah, like it is strange because it's been like almost nonstop for us in a weird way, because we had a lot of things going on going into it. And like Luke's saying, it really did just mean that things that maybe would have otherwise like elevated to the next stage or died kind of just hung around. So it was suddenly like everybody was asking us for everything, and it probably is like made us a little bit like less fussy about things in a way, Luke. I think just because it was like, well, it was like you were saying, it was just so hard to even believe that movies were going to exist again. So it's not that I think we were doing good work, but I think I think we always do good work, or as good as work as we can. But I think it was a bit more of a like, okay, it's done, get it out of here, because
the carrot was kind of gone, and we were just kind of like, little donkeys wandering around. Like, okay, wait, where'd the carrot go? Like, I guess we're supposed to keep walking. I don't know.
Yeah, it was
going to be
really,
movie theaters?
Really
Is
weird.
there going to be movies shot in the next 2 years? It was scary for a while. It seems like. Now we have a release date, which is nice, because we sort of went into the pandemic of, great, a big, successful sale at Sundance, and oh my God, our first theatrical movie, and yay, and then like, no, no more movies right now. So I'm so glad that it's actually coming out in theaters on July 16th. Like, wow.
Yeah, I think there was definitely like a stages of grief component to like when you described it, Luke, of the like, oh, I should write a spec, or like, no, fuck everything, I don't want to write at all anymore, or like, oh, I should just enjoy playing video games. Like whichever version of the thing, it almost does have like a stages of like dealing with just this reality that kept going. And I think at a certain point, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know where I'm going with that, but I think we got into a place of acceptance, and things have gotten kind of normal recently because we have just been busy. But yeah, I don't know, that's not really a good answer. We just kind of suffered through it mostly.
Just like everybody else.
Yeah, I mean, but a lot of our process was already involved talking on the phone all the time, and that's dating back from the earliest time we wrote. So like it was easier probably for us in that sense, because the functional aspect of our work relationship was kind of, the mechanism was the same. Like we talk on the phone to write stories mostly, and then break off and do scripting separately. So we were able to do that.
We are super blessed to have been the people that could still work during all this with minimal interruptions. So I, for any of my like sort of whining about that, it is sort of like, well, at least we were able to kind of continue to be as weird as it was. So yeah, we're very aware of that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, on a creative aspect, obviously you're saying that, you know, your part didn't stop. So, you know, the content creation engine keeps moving, even though everything else around it is at a full standstill. Where did this idea for this film come about? And what was the initial process to trying to get it made?
I mean,
Great
that's
question.
an interesting one. I'll try and go kind of quickly. I think the shortest answer is it's a bit of a pastiche of our favorite things that we tried to put in other movies that people wouldn't let us do. So we were kind of up and coming writers, and we sort of entered the horror world at the time that like Paranormal Activity was popping. So like our very first entrance into Hollywood, like the horror scene was all like found footage. And, you know, trying to do that. And we wrote this movie, Stephanie, that was an idea to like, can we do limited location that's not necessarily found footage and like try and do stuff. And, but we kind of got into the studio system a tiny bit, and it was kind of quickly pretty frustrating. And I mean, this was what, like 6 years ago?
Oh, no, this is much longer. I mean,
when did we write Night House? 7 years
ago? We wrote
ago?
Night House in 2014. And so in the years like immediately leading up to it, like we had started pitching on like franchise projects. So like, you know, back when Dimension was still in existence, like, oh, Dimension had Halloween and Hellraiser and, you know, whatever else they had. And so it's like you get these calls where it's like, oh, they want to do they want to reboot Halloween. And so they go out to like, you know, God knows how many people, 20 people, and we were the cheaper, you know, less experienced, more easily to push around kind of writers that would get added to these lists of people to pitch. And so, but for us, it's like, well, if we do a good enough job, this is our big break, you know. So you know, we overdid all of the preparation for those pitches that were just like, I mean, flushed down the toilet in the room. I mean, it's
outlines of like every scene. But when you go through that process, it's like, well, there was one movie that had sort of like we came up with the idea of we wanted to have a backwards house, like a duplex with like, oh, a reverse floor plan would be like cool and scary. But that ended up not happening. And like, oh, a hidden room that like is, oh no, but that ended up not happening. And we
that was Amityville.
on Hellraiser.
It's Amityville.
We pitched on Hellraiser story that we wanted to do all about, you know, grief and sexuality and stuff like that. And like that ended up not happening in that way. And so we ended up taking a lot of bits and pieces of stuff that was kind of discarded and then can we make a story out of it and really get back to doing what we had started on, which is the very first screenplay we wrote together was really more of like, both have to different degrees of theater background of like an improv game. When we first started writing, it was like, I would write some pages, send it to Ben. He would write some pages and send it back. And we just kind of passed that candle and really play the game of trying to scare each other. So when we started Night House, we were so frustrated with chasing these open writing assignment jobs and, you know, having our scripts go into the studio system and be kind of picked apart and changed around as like, can we just write one for us and like try to scare each other again? And if along the way we can kind of start using a lot of these ideas and images that we found so, you know, enticing, and that became that. But then we showed it to our reps and it was kind of like, great, this is cool. It doesn't expand your brand. So we're not going to take this out right now. This is going to sit in a drawer for a little while.
I mean, it's funny because it was we wrote it right. I mean, that was the year that like Purge 2 came out, I think, or something. So there hadn't been a bunch of like new.
There was no Get Out. Hits. There was no Hereditary. There was no The Witch. The art house horror thing wasn't exactly the thing yet. And so it was sort of like, this isn't Insidious or, you know, whatever kind of more mainstream one. So
yeah, it was sort of odd, and they just didn't think it would help. And hilariously, like in our minds, the whole reason, because everything Luke said, but we also were kind of like, well, we could like write it something that's like inexpensive and like, I don't know, we can like find a director ourselves. Like we know directors. And so we showed it to David Bruckner as well. We sent it to our reps and they said no. We sent it to David Bruckner saying, we would like you to direct this movie. And he didn't read it until like 2017.
Until after he had done The Ritual. Like I think he became a big success with The Ritual and then was like, what was that script you guys had? So I mean, honestly, the timing could have been better. It all worked out for the best. So it's just, we're definitely on a 5-year sort of plan of like, we write a script, it's like, this is going to happen. and then it happens like 5 years later.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
business,
Yeah. And so this was like there was a period of development in certain ways over the course of that time after we wrote the script, because even though our reps didn't take it out, we did end up like attaching producers and a director that didn't make the movie, and we actually developed it with them, with sort of, you know, like kind of with us as producers as well in a way. I mean, like at that point it was like our project, so we were working with a team of people that it didn't work out with, and we parted ways with them and are still friends with them. But then we got lucky in that right as we were finishing that chapter of the development, Dave became available and hungry for another movie. And so it was really good timing that we were able to ultimately get the director we initially wanted after a period of like a sort of a love story in a way. But it, you know, he came back to us.
A long-winded answer, but it was a long road. It was a long road to getting this one made, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, while we're talking about like getting it made and your writing process, especially for it, I'm curious about how you two went about constructing the character, well, the main character of Beth, who was played just absolutely wonderfully by Rebecca Hall. Yeah, just perfect. Because I mean, I guess I would call this psychological horror if I had to pinpoint what it was. And I always get a little nervous just as a horror lover. That when you start saying psychological, it's going to mean that the woman, or I mean, I guess just the main character, is going to be, you know, hysterical and, you know, oh, is she crazy? Is she losing her mind? And this avoided that.
Thank you.
So
yes.
I wonder how you kind of, yeah, I mean, how you went in to find that character and how you went about constructing it.
I mean, I will say off the top, you know, I think I'm glad to hear you say that, because as horror fans ourselves, I think what colors a lot of this stuff is it's not, you know, some big intentional thing on our part. You know, just even thinking about, you know, a lot of these questions, I think just as fans, we're very wary of tropes. And sometimes that bites us in the ass because we're so, I don't want to put something on screen that I've seen before. And so sometimes it makes us get a little too weird. And I'm sure, you know, that there are other things that are blind spots for us where we are doing sort of cliche or tropey things, but we are very much trying to avoid it. And for me, the are they crazy, is this happening, is this not happening thing, in addition to being like, you know, kind of a problematic trope, especially when you apply it to a woman and it has the hysteria undertones, it's just annoying as a viewer to have the narrative constantly undermined by the narrative itself of like, look, I bought a ticket for a movie about a supernatural force. I don't want the movie to waste 45, 50 minutes telling me, no, there isn't. Like, just come on, like, let's get to the stuff and explore what that means for this character. So from a top-down view, just to kind of pinpoint that, I totally agree with you. And I'm glad to hear that it didn't feel like we were at all playing that game of like, yeah, the movie's not letting itself be the movie it wants to be, or that you know, were sold on.
Yeah, and I think that that's both why we wrote it. I mean, it's indicative of everything you were saying, Luke, about just like being tired of the stuff that we were sort of getting pushed around on. You know, it's like we try to craft these like fantastic, you know, narratives for these like, you know, disposable Hollywood movies in some cases, and it was like, well, we just want to do something for ourselves. And so like we got to tell the story paced the way we liked it, and we got to avoid the things that we didn't want to deal with. You know, there's not a lot of like police and stuff in the movie either, and it's like, because that's usually boring in a horror movie. It's a perfunctory thing. Let's just find a way to avoid the things we don't want to see and tell the story the way we think it should be told. And that's the benefit of taking the path we took, but obviously that's tricky too.
But in terms of Beth, I think, you know, there's a lot of, I taught high school for 9 years, and it was a very tough job. And I was teaching while we were doing a lot of the writing. I think we maybe wrote Night House like the first year I had quit teaching.
Yeah,
like,
you would just quit.
Doing enough. So I was like, I'm going to try like writing full time and not teaching anymore. And so I was just in a vulnerable spot, and I'm just kind of an irascible person where I kind of come into a room and I can't do small talk. Like, you know, if somebody is, you know, talking to me about the weather, I just like, okay, yeah, I'm 5 steps ahead. I know, I get it. Like, I don't want to talk about this stuff. Like, I want to talk about something that interests me. And so I don't know. I do think a lot of Beth was, we wrote this grieving character, it sort of gave license to vent a lot of my just frustrations with other people and human interaction of like, this is a woman that's going to be exasperated with everybody. She's emotionally raw. She's emotionally unsure of her place in the world. I guess, you know, looking back the way I was at the time, like, okay, I just lost kind of stability. I'm feeling jumpy and I'm feeling scared and I'm also feeling angry and over it. And so I think there was just a lot of that. So I think of all the characters that we've ever written, Beth is the one that I feel closest to in some ways. I mean, especially once you see her like fully realized on screen and you know, the performer gets it so right. You know, I remember seeing the first dailies of Rebecca doing some of the scenes. I think it was a teacher scene, and it was like, I had this sense of like accomplishment that I could sort of yell at the parent, you know, via this character 10 years down the line was like really cathartic.
Well, I mean, it was very funny to see. I can't remember, Luke, if you maybe you can remember, maybe, but like it was a day on set, I think, or it was watching cuts of it later, but there was a moment where it clicked for me that like Rebecca almost like talks like you in the movie. And it was funny to me because it's like, we don't know her well at all. I mean, we've met her very briefly and stuff, but I think it's like, I think the spirit of the character, the stuff that Luke's talking about probably did come through in a certain kind of way. But it's weird though, because there's other times where I feel like the same kind of thing, where there's certain scenes with the way she communicates, which it's not as like very specific and cathartic, like your moment as a teacher kind of thing, but it's like things where it's like I relate to her because I like the way she explains things to people. And I like the way that I don't know, there's something there to it. So it's like, I think it was a lot of different things that we were pulling from, like Luke saying, like the parts of the other movies, and then applying a lot of our perspective.
This is the thing, not to run away with it, and so you can keep your answer short, but we've never talked about it, but I do wonder the Beth and Claire relationship, how much that mirrors you and me, and like who's the Beth and who's the Claire in any given situation. It might be something we're thinking about.
It probably just alternates, because we never both get upset in the same way at the same time. It's always going to be one of us. It has to be the one to calm the other one down, or you know what I mean. So there is like that dynamic where you're shifting, and so I think in this case, if they're like archetypes that we embody rather than like assignations of our specific character. But yeah, maybe all that as well. I don't know.
Yeah, the teacher dynamic definitely stood out to me as somebody who has taught English for many years. I think I texted a friend of mine after I watched the film, and I was like, I think Beth would have been our friend. I was just like, it was a moment of catharsis when she was talking to the parents. But well, okay, knowing that you wanted to like avoid the tropes as you were making this, what did you look to as like your major influences? As far as like films, I don't know, because when I think of psychological horror, obviously there's going to be a lot of like mystery and gaslighting, and I often think of like those early like noir films. I don't know, what were y'all watching anything in particular or reading anything when you were doing this?
So when you say watching and reading, because I think that was around the time.
Music does a lot for me. Like, this is sort of a small thing that's largely unrelated, but it actually applied more directly to an early script we wrote. But there's this Tom Waits song called "What's He Building in There?" And it's this spoken word poem with just Tom Waits. It's like, "What's he building in there?" And it just like goes on, and like talking about his neighbors and this like mysterious figure. And it's just like really evocative, like spoken word piece. And that had a big impact on me. And so, the idea of like, what is like a man building something, and it's like, what are they up to? Like, he's going out into the woods, he's taking his wood out of the woods, and he's building a house. Like, it's like, what is happening? And so that seemed like really scary to me and like kind of poetic. And I know that was something that I put in. And then there's another Tom Waits song called "Come On Up to the House," which was not intentional, but if you listen to the lyrics of "Come On Up to the House," it's kind of just like this, like it's telling the story of the movie in a weird way.
Not in a way that spoils anything, I think, but yeah, I think there's a lot of that stuff in there. But we were also like, I think we had started reading some of the sort of 70s horror novels that
Right.
not necessarily the ones that got adapted into really great movies, but we also like read some of those too, and it's like interesting to like the style of how, you know, things like Rosemary's Baby or The Exorcist or stuff like that, that there was this trend of these kind of like movies about people living sort of mundane lives that then suddenly sort of like become supernatural in this weird way, but it's like I don't know, there's something interesting about it that started to really turn our gears, I think.
70s horror in general, I think it was an attempt to like, can we do something like that? Because we tend to, and you can see, I think to some extent, in a good way, we kind of failed, but like our attempt was to write, well, let's just something like humorless. Because even something like Super Dark Times, like I know, and I'm particularly guilty of it, is like, well, I want to have the banter and the funny stuff and the jokes and the characters. Oh, I just can't resist it. And with this, it was sort of like, let's just make something scary, like the old 70s horror movies where we're not like doing any sort of winks and nudges and one-liners. And we're not doing any of that, but I do think just because of the way the character ended up being, you know, you get these kind of cathartic joke moments and a wry sense of humor throughout the Night House to some extent. But yeah, the 70s horror in general, and then like the weird one is specifically the movie The Entity, which is kind of weird when to think about in relationship to this. And the script evolved a little bit, but there was a much stronger sort of sexual or sensual component to Beth's relationship with the entity in the Night House. So I don't want to get into any sort of, you know, spoilers of what exactly is going on in that house. But Entity's a really cool movie, but it's also an exploitation movie, and it is a character that is largely devoid of agency. And so it was sort of the idea of, could we do something sort of like that, that has,
but with more emotion though. Yeah, that there's more emotion involved in it,
and driven by the character themselves. Because this is not something that's happened. Something happens to Beth, and now she is on a journey, as opposed to something is happening to her. Like everything, you know, like, and that's again what the Claire character is sort of for her. Again, I don't want to spoil too much, but like to sort of balance out. I want to know something. I don't know if that's a good idea. Nope, this is my choice. I'm choosing to do this, and so yeah, I'm sort of tiptoeing around things. But the Entity was a weird one that we talked about in terms of like, could we do something like that was not as icky?
Well, because The Entity feels like one of those 70s horror movies in a way, but it isn't, you know, because it is more of an exploitation movie. But the thing that, but like, it
also feels like a Spielberg movie. Like the first like 30 minutes of The Entity feel like classic Spielberg in a way, and
it's
so
weird.
Like, stuff starts happening.
But it's like, but what it has in common with the 70s movies, and what I think we started gravitating towards, is that the movies are about adults with relatable adult problems. Because it's like, if you look at, and I'm not like a scholar or anything, but just my understanding of it is that like, once people figured out that it was cheaper to cast like not famous teenagers in horror movies, they're easier to kill off on screen. It's cheaper to make the movies. Like, you can get them to be naked easier. Like, there's all these reasons why teenage characters, and look, we write movies about teenagers a lot too, but I think it's like looking at the horror genre and going back to the idea that like, you don't have to necessarily you don't have to be an expecting mother to find Rosemary's Baby scary, but if you are an expecting mother, it will be fucking horrifying. So it's like finding things where it's like the thing that the genre aspect can communicate scares to an audience, and should, no matter who you are, right? Because the you know, the devil showing up in your dreams or something is going to be scary. But it's like, why limit yourself to sort of just like cost efficient narrative constraints, rather than like think about people who are going to watch the movie, and think about yourselves and go like, well, you know, I mean, at the time we wrote it, I think I hadn't turned 30 yet. I don't remember, or I just turned 30. And it was like, so I guess, you know, at that point I was an adult, but it's like, I don't know, like, I have as much of an emotional stake. Like I can think about things that would be upsetting to me, and that's as valid as anybody else. So a movie, if I think it's scary in that way, then maybe it'll be scary to other people. And you know, like I think we had the luxury of like testing this one a little bit because no one was demanding it from us, so we could tell people about it and sort of gauge people's responses and grasp that it was working. But yeah, I'm just rambling here, but yeah.
Rambling's great though. I mean, I think especially, and to your point where, if it's something that would scare you, or it's something that it's deeply felt to you, there's obviously that's going to resonate with somebody. And I think those are the best types of horror movies. Like, we can all experience fear. It's a human emotion, but there's different type, like that, particularly that pinpoint thing scares me personally. And that's our biggest fear. And I think with this movie, and especially even with the trailer, which I found the trailer really terrifying, because for me, home invasion is like a huge fear of mine, and something in my house. Like that for me is a fear point, but also grief is a fear point for a lot of people. Nobody wants to lose somebody out their life, especially somebody that they care about. And where Beth is concerned, I mean, we are dropped directly into the aftermath of losing her husband unexpectedly. And for her, and we go through the trailer of where she had no inkling of any issues with that particular piece. So with the grief, and for me, my other hat that I wear in my life is I'm a behavioral therapist. So I deal with trauma, trauma recovery, and grief all the time. And it was that, and that was one of the pieces that I really loved about this work, was that it was very kind, and it was very well thought out, because that can also be an exploitive piece, right? We see it. We live in America. We see grief exploited all the time. So with this piece, and especially as a tender of a point that grief is, was there anything that you tried not to do, or things that you were trying to draw off of in your research of or grief, or did you even go through the 5 steps? Did you try to take her through those pieces?
I think I'm going to answer first, and Luke, you can talk, you'll color in some things, but I do, it's interesting because looking back on it, it's very strange. At the time that we started writing it, and I mean, we each have had, like, family members, die. It's not that that's never happened or something, but I don't think either of us had really, like, experienced, like, a very close person, someone very close to us dying in the way that, like, would even begin to scratch the surface of, like, the kind of things we were depicting in this movie. And I think that, that obviously meant that we were thoughtful and careful about that, but it also to some degree may have been a kind of psychological working out of, like, empathetically walking ourselves through it to some degree. What I will say, without, like, trying to turn it into some sort of personal thing, is that, like, what's very strange is we completed the script in, I believe, October of 2014, and on December 22nd, one of my closest friends passed away suddenly. Like I woke up and got a call that he woke up and he just died in his sleep, and it was totally insane. And it was interesting to have already written a movie about it, and then, like we said, that sort of 5-year process that it took to make it. So, like, I did go through my own grief experience in that time, and I don't think anything that I experienced, or, like, there was no fundamental changes to the script in terms of the structure based on what I learned about grief having going through it. But I do think it probably colored or gave confidence to that we were on the right track, because at least I could sort of use myself as a personal litmus test of, like, well, can I imagine somebody behaving this way? Because I do think grief gets depicted in a very limited spectrum on screen in movies. And I think that it's like people, I think maybe, like, people don't want to really dig into, like, the movie In the Bedroom is one of the best movies, and one of the ones I was thinking about in terms of grief, right? Because it's about, you see how this couple who they loved each other and everything was wonderful, they lose their son, and you see them drift apart. And it's not because they don't love each other anymore, they, like, can't, because the thing that they both loved died, and they can't understand each other's grief. And it's so sad, and that movie really made an impact on me when I saw it as a teenager. So I think it's just, like, to some degree you pick up on that stuff culturally, and, like, and Luke, I'm sorry you went on for way too long, but I think some of it's our imagination, some of it's cultural osmosis, but in the interim, I did get a different kind of glimpse of it, and I'd like to think that some of that got bled over into the material in some sort of honest way. I don't know though. Luke, I'm sorry, took way too long on that.
No, yeah. No, I think it's in some ways related to what you're saying, because for me, I think a lot of the writing process, like when I was like 15 or something, I read Stephen King's / Richard Bachman's Long Walk and had like a full-on existential crisis of like, I'm gonna die someday, and everybody that I love is going to die someday, and like it just really hit hard, and I had a really hard kind of messed up time with it. And since that point, I've sort of, I'm terrified of oblivion and I'm terrified of death. And I've been lucky enough to have never really lost, like Ben said, someone like super duper close to me in a way that my world is no longer the same. Like there's a hole where this person was. And so I think a lot of my writing, but also my media consumption and the music that I listen to and the things that move me most are things that I feel are preparing me for the inevitable of like, I kind of go through life as an artist and as a consumer of art, kind of like, all right, let's put on the armor. Let me face this again and again and again and again, so that when I do get there, I stand, I can fool myself into thinking, look, no, you're ready for this. Like, this is what you spent your whole kind of emotional life, trying to forge yourself.
No, and it's, and I can vouch for, because Luke and I have known each other for, what is it now? We met when I was 15 and Luke was
in like what, 99?
Yeah. So we've known each other for quite a long time now, and he has like some of the ideas in Night House, like some of the stuff in dialogue, the expressions of some of the things he's talking about are things that like I've been hearing Luke talk about like late at night since we were teenagers. Like literally, I mean, it's like, it is real, and it's really satisfying and cool to see how. And it's funny because Mo, I also used to be really afraid of home invasion stuff. Like I was really, really scared. When I moved to Los Angeles, I was such a mess for like 2 years. And it's like, I do think that for both of us, whether it actually like, I mean, I'm less paranoid now, but I do think that writing these kind of movies has a sort of, like kind of experiential mental exercise, kind of aversion therapy. I don't know, whatever, like the put your hand in the spider tank kind of thing. There's something to it. I don't know.
Right. So yeah, I mean, I personally, I don't know if it sounds bad to say, like, didn't do a ton of like research, but I think what we always do when we approach a character, it is, again, with sort of a, I wanted to be an actor, and so the idea of like, I just want to be this person for a while and play the game of, well, what would I do? How would I feel? What would I react? And incrementally do that. And, hopefully that ends up feeling a little bit, that there is an honesty to it, because we are trying really hard to be this person for a little while when we write. At least I am, for sure.
Yeah, and treating and really treating our characters, especially our lead characters, with a lot of respect, I think, and trying to leading with the belief that if you care about people more, you will be more invested in the scary things that happen to them. So both for the like quality of the movie as a film or whatever, but also for the effectiveness of the genre stuff, I think that really investing in taking seriously like
and they
what
don't
decisions
have to be
they make and how
they
they present
care
it.
about them
No,
either.
that's a myth. It's a myth, because I mean, I'm sure plenty of people would say that Beth can be like unlikable, but I think everyone likes her. So it's like she's intense sometimes, and we like that about her. It's fun.
That's why
fun to watch. Yeah.
All right, I was really, really excited to hear you bring up The Long Walk, because that is one of my favorite King stories. And actually, when I was watching the trailer for this, another one that I thought about was Lisey's story, because I feel like, I don't know, this, you can talk, when you talk about like big ideas in horror, and the things that kind of really get down to that like existential dread, obviously there's the idea that what awaits us at the end of life, like that is something I think that is just terrifying to everybody. But then there's also this idea of like taking, because this the most intimate relationship you can have with somebody, right, with like marriage, and then the idea of not really being able to know the other person totally, but also not being able to share yourself with them totally. So I don't know. I feel like when I saw the trailer, I got really excited, because I thought, oh, this is kind of going to jump into this a little bit. So I don't know how much of that played into it. Just the idea of like, what is a marriage relationship?
Yeah, that's actually a huge part of it that sometimes comes up, Ben, and this is like
Yeah.
it predates you, but another like just a moment in high school, and like it sounds dumb, but I as a teenager I remember seeing at home and watching like I don't know, it was Maury Povich or Jerry Springer, but it was like one of those like daytime talk shows, those really salacious things, and they had like divorced couples on there that were like fighting, and it was like this couple in their like 50s or 60s getting a divorce, and they'd been married for a long time, and they were being so horrible to each other. And I remember watching that as a young person who had like yet to fall in love or do any of these things, being like, this is the most terrifying thing I can imagine. The idea of that you spent your life with somebody, that you built every memory that you have, every Christmas, every piece of furniture, every place you've lived, that's all wrapped up in memories shared with this person. And to now hate this person and this person hates you, and every memory of your life is like now kind of tainted or called into question of like, was it ever real? And it just really hit me hard of like, this is very upsetting. And so, when we wrote the script, the Beth character was written to be actually a lot older for a number of reasons. But, in part because the idea was you kind of wanted to feel like it's too late to start over. And like, how terrifying would it be to have gone on this journey? And then not only are you alone, but like, who the fuck was I walking with?
Yeah.
On the journey? And now where the fuck am
Yeah,
I?
and what do I do now? Like, yeah. And that, I think, and I mean, I guess it's worth noting that at the time we wrote it, I mean, Luke and I were each married, and we are each married now. So I do think that, like, I don't know, I mean, it sounds silly, but like being a horror writer, especially before it's like a legitimized thing. I mean, I'm a nocturnal person anyways, so like the first couple of years of my first marriage, I was definitely awake at till 4 a.m. writing the scripts that Luke and I would later like make a career out of. But I was very aware of the fact that, like, I mean, you can say, yeah, I'm writing screenplays, and then you're just up all night, and it's like, I can understand like the oddity of that. And like, I also had like the thoughts of like, what if I was keeping that a secret, and then like if I died, and then like my wife was going through all my stuff and found all this weird shit. And it's like, I mean, if you write horror movies, you've Googled a bunch of weird shit. So I think like the idea of like sort of like, I mean, in a way it was like a role reversal thing in my mind of going like, well, what's the worst thing that could happen? Like, if I wasn't a screenwriter and I died, and then somebody would throw my stuff, it's like, what's the worst thing they could find? In a way, like there's something to like thinking about what's the fears based around that are.
Which is a lot of what we try to do, is sort of like, we always strip away the supernatural. As much as we love the supernatural is a metaphor for something else. You don't put the supernatural on top of something else necessarily. You tie it in. So it's not like he's an alcoholic and a ghost. He's a guy who's addicted to ghosts. Or, like you kind of find to use the supernatural in there. But we always think, what's the fear button? Like what are we talking about that is scary? And this is the idea that's scary. And then can we do a supernatural twist on it? And of course there's other things too, like, life after death and all that. But you were definitely, this was an idea that scared us, or it certainly scared me. And it was, we write a horror movie that actually plays on that fear. And again, in the same way that, Exorcist is about my child is sick. Strip away everything else. It's just, you have a sick child, you don't know what's wrong, and what do you do? I've taken her to everybody. No one can help. That's terrifying, whether or not the devil's involved or not. So.
All right. Well, I think I'll have one last question before we open it up to some of our audience. Okay. So, I mean, I've been smiling this whole time listening to y'all talk, because you obviously are fans of the genre. We are all fans of the genre. Nyx as a group is about, women trying to get together and make a space in the horror genre. I don't know if you have any maybe advice or something that you could share for how specifically women in the horror genre can kind of make a space for ourselves, as it was, I'll be honest, predominantly male filmmakers. Up until now we're seeing more, but I don't know if you could share maybe some advice or thoughts that might help some of us make a space.
I think that everybody, I'm just going to jump on this right away, Luke, and then you can you can tell, you know, if I'm wrong, but I think that like for us, because I'm going back to when we very first, in my mind, I'm thinking back to when we first started writing together, and we had scripts that were like kind of like genre mashups. You know, we wrote just kind of like whatever, like he said, we were passing things back and forth so that there was like an undisciplined quality to it. And but the writing was, I think, good enough, at least, that when people started reading our stuff and when we started talking to people in like the industry or whatever, we were given the advice of trying to focus more on like one genre at a time rather than making these weirdly shaped things that, you know, you can't make a trailer for, basically. So we started leaning on the horror stuff, but like Luke was saying, at the time, horror had become, especially studio horror pre-Paranormal Activity, had become very programmatic and boring to me anyways. Like there was a lot of, it was the Saw era, and it's like, look, all respect to the first Saw movie, but like at a certain point that was just dominating everything. And so it was scary for us to be like, well, we don't want to do like the kind of movies we don't like. So is buying into like focusing on this genre, does that mean we have to compromise and be something we don't want to be in order to have success? And I think that where we started to feel comfortable is when we started to embrace the things that were unique about our perspective and our taste and our interest, and finding ways to apply what was uniquely ours to understandable genre functionality, you know, like a sort of a movie that has our spin on what something is, so it's both the genre and it's like, you know, original and unique to us. And I think that like for anybody, that's the advice I would give anybody. Now I think specifically for women, because like you said, there hasn't been nearly the depth of like, you know, or breadth of movies made over the years of the history of the existence of movies and genre and everything. It's been mostly men. So that means there's a lot of stories that haven't been told. And there are a lot of stories that not only haven't been told, they can't be told until somebody who can tell them tells them. And so whoever you are, you have something unique, and you should be trying to find a way to make the most of that, and not try to buy into what other people are doing anyways. You know what I mean? And so I think that like, that just has to be the answer, because I think that there is an absolute craving for these stories right now. Like I think that we're seeing the genre change, and we're seeing the audience change and announce a need for this more. So I think that like the need will be met.
Yeah, I mean,
in
but
time as people are getting encouraged in a way.
In addition to stories, I think it's more interesting is perspectives, because the same story told.
Yes, also true.
Right. Yeah, I think we sort of have this binary thing that we're getting into, and it's great, and it's growing pains. But you know, okay, yeah, lots of Black filmmakers are getting the chance to make films, but they have to do it about, you know, Black trauma, or women are being able to tell stories, but they have to tell stories about women. It's like, well, I kind of want to see women telling stories about very traditionally masculine characters or stories, because I want to see their perspective on those tropes and those types of things, you know. And I want Ta-Nehisi Coates to write Captain America as well as Black Panther, you know. So that's the thing, is perspective to me is just as interesting as stories of, like, you know, it's not off limits for a woman to write about whatever kind of character of you know, very a man that comes back from war and has PTSD, like, you know, like I would love to see that sort of thing.
Well, it's the write what you know thing. Write what you know is a cliche that I don't know what it was ever supposed to mean, but at a certain point it became clear to me that what it gets misconstrued to mean is write based on your specific experience. And what I think that the broader and healthier definition is writing from your emotional understanding of truths or something. So what, that's perspective, right? Whatever you are bringing your perspective and your uniqueness by writing what you know to be true. And that doesn't mean if it's writing a character that's like you or specific, you know, whatever. It's that is what you're saying. Yeah, ultimately, yes.
Yeah. I mean, but in terms of it, yeah, I mean, it's so tricky, and it's really tricky for us because we don't have a ton of power. Like, you know, David Bruckner is a great director that will listen to us in terms of, like, you know, casting or hiring positions. You know, producers will, like, keep us informed, but you know, we kind of, especially me, you know, I very much just like, I do the writing and then that's it. And so much of how we got in was, you know, connections that you had from film school and stuff, Ben, of, like, you know, so this is kind of just applies to everybody, you know, in terms of building a space, but, you know, I think could work for women too, is just, you know, kind of just really got to lock arms. And that's why something like this is so, like the next thing that you guys put together, or that you people have put together. But like, you know, that you're creating spaces where you can connect with people, because so much of it is networking, but not networking in a sleazy and gross sense where everybody's out to get something, but just like making friends who also make cool stuff, so that you can sort of be the person who is, oh, I'm an assistant to so-and-so and they need scripts, and like, I've read your scripts, you talked to me about that one was really cool, like I know that, you know, or, you know, I'm looking for a female DP for this project, and like, that's what, oh, I know somebody, you know, like making sure that there are connections and friendships, and that there are like-minded people, and just, you know, definitely having that, you know, kind of, again, locking arms and finding community, so that everybody rises together. I think that's how we've got, like with Night House, is just like, well, Night House got maybe because David Bruckner was successful with The Ritual, you know, that helped push it over the edge. And, you know, we had Super Dark Times, which was kind of successful. So we were able to, like, oh, if we combine our powers, now we can do that. So I think that there is definitely just a lot of really interlocking and making sure that you're being a really good person and a good collaborator. And it's not,
it's a good citizen. You're a good citizen of a film community. I think that this what you're saying, Lucas, applies for everybody who sees the necessity of the current diversity conversations. And I think that it's like, you know, so being aware of it, because look, everybody, I mean, the number of times, like Luke made reference to, the number of times I get asked, you know, oh, do you know any female directors? Do you know any female DPs? I mean, people, there is a need for this stuff. And so it's like, if you make yourself aware of it and you try to have answers to those questions, and you try to be aware of the movies that you're, you know, the smaller budget movies or the short film, you know, whatever, it's like, everybody has to be sort of like good citizens of the film community. I honestly think that that's the benefit. It's in the benefit for everybody if everybody treats everybody like that and tries to see it as, you know, something everyone does together. Maybe, I don't know, maybe that's too hopeful of me.
And signal boosting, and and then, you know, certainly on our end, you know, like watching as many of these as possible, so that, because there's been situations where we were in a room and pitching on a remake for something, and they were like, okay, ultimately we kind of don't want it to be, we were pitching something with Kevin, and it was like, well, we don't want it to be a bunch of dudes making this thing, and we're like, cool, we do know this person, you know, and that's what you want, is the opportunities to spread the love.
Well, that's because everybody wants to get a recommendation from someone they trust, so it's like, be aware of that and use it as best you can, you know.
But
use your powers for good.
Yes, as much as possible.
Your powers for good. And accessibility is difficult for us, I mean, as a woman in the industry. So I think that behavior is something that we are hopeful that will continue, is that, you know, oh, I know this female X. That's kind of, unfortunately, how doors are going to open for us here. So we appreciate the camaraderie in that piece, which is really
absolutely.
Yeah, I'm very excited. Thank you. So we are going to actually open it up to, we had a few questions. I wanted to have Eunice Levis open her camera and her mic. She had a really great question on your, for Ben and Luke. So Eunice, go ahead and open your cam and your mic.
Hi guys, I'm so sorry. I'm driving and listening, so I can't turn on my mic. But
okay, yeah, be safe, please.
Yeah, focus on the road.
I just really wanted
whatever
to be
you want to know.
here. Thank you so much. Can you please read my question? I'm so sorry.
Yeah, oh, wait, Mo.
I will do that. Let me see. She's like, I cannot take my eyes off the wheel because, again, good citizens of the world. Okay, so Eunice would like to know, what makes a horror film great for you, and are there any horror tropes that you absolutely love?
That's a really good question. Tropes that I love. Okay, wait, yeah, we definitely have got something. We have to have something good for this.
What was the first part though? Like, what makes a horror film great for us?
Yeah.
It's true. I mean, I guess this kind of speaks to both. I love a boogeyman story. Like, a lot of people talk about slashers, and like for me, it's Nightmare on Elm Street and Candyman and Hellraiser, the kind of like more supernatural stuff. And so the boogeyman trope of like a kind of iconic figure is always does a little something for me.
Yeah.
I this isn't. I think we see more and more of it, and it's something that we certainly try to do to some extent. But I remember seeing. I tell the story a lot, but I remember when we'd see the movie Mama out, and my wife went into the restroom after the movie, and she came out, and she heard like two teenagers talking, and they were like almost kind of upset, and they were like, "You're not supposed. Horror movies aren't supposed to make you cry." And I was like, "Well, but they should, So if a horror movie can, I love all the stuff, but if you can also find the melancholy stuff or some sort of emotional stuff, which we talk about Stephen King, I think that's what Stephen King does so well. Is it's so scary. It's also like, especially when he's got a little older and like stuff like Joyland, like there's this real sense of bittersweet nostalgia and melancholy to it. And if you can tap into, if you're telling stories about ghosts, if you're telling stories about death and pain, that if there is this a kind of a raw and not cynical emotion, because that's the other thing is like I love a lot of these super duper scary movies, but they're very cynical. And so something that makes it great for me is if we can find a non-cynical, I love it a lot more than Ben, but like Dr. Sleep is like a really great horror movie for me because it's kind. And so I do for kindness, and so ensembles coming together and camaraderie is again a very Stephen King thing of characters interacting. Those tropes of the band sort of getting together is always something that really sings. I don't know if you've got
for some reason, like when I think of tropes, it's like I can't even think of specific things. I just think of like there's certain movies that do things that I find tropey, but that it just clicks perfectly. Like I feel like Fright Night, the original Fright Night, is one that it's like it's like I'm not saying that that's it, but there's something that's just so perfect about it, even if it is a little like there's movies like that that are like, I don't know. What's the other, the Night of the Creeps, Luke? I don't know why. Like something about like the first thing I thought of was
we both love a sad detective. Like,
yes, that was the first thing I thought of was Tom Atkins.
Night of the Creeps. Like you come in and like he pulls his head out of the oven and like turns the gas off, and like it goes uncommented upon. But it's like, what an incredible piece of storytelling that it's just like you knock on the door, it's like, well, I guess I'm not gonna commit suicide today. I'll come help you fight these zombie slugs. Like it just folded into the fabric of that movie. Yeah.
Yeah, and then the other thing I'll say about what makes a great horror movie, everything Luke said, but then the other thing that I thought of that's different is I've gotten attached recently. I feel like, Luke, we tend to talk about it because we're writing so many different things at once. I think we get attached to like the differences between them to focus on so that we're not like overlapping too much. And so like I think one of the things that I've really gotten attached to is like it's amazing when a horror movie can find a certain little section of like culture or a slice of life sort of experience or something that you can now imbue something scary or evocative into that otherwise hadn't been, like the whole sort of like it'll do for fill in the blank what Jaws did for the beach kind of thing. But like it's like in Night House, there's a lot of those. Like there's a lot of little details of like, I mean, between the time that we wrote it and the time it came out, I mean, texting has become much more accepted on screen stuff, but like things like that, where it's like, if you can find a way to make getting a text at 2 a.m. really scary, so that the next time somebody who, after they've seen the movie, they when it happens to them, they think of the movie. I love that. I love when something makes me think of something else, And so I think part of what makes a great horror movie is its ability to connect to your life subsequent to the actual watching of the movie and kind of make you see things a little bit differently. And I don't know, I find that fun. I don't know if that's a good answer, but that's something for me.
It's an excellent answer.
Thank you.
I mean, horror movies are really the only genre that follows you home, right? Like you don't, if you see a scary movie, you're like, it puts something in your head, puts something in the culture. Like, well, Stephen King has completely destroyed Maine for the entire world. Like everybody thinks that Maine is like a hellmouth, which is, which is great. It's great for the genre. But I think that I completely agree with you, Ben, that it's just that one piece that it makes you, it's so congruent to the other piece, which is really, really great. Thank you, Eunice. I appreciate you. Drive safe.
Yeah, great question.
Great questions. I have a question from Kelly Kraus, who is a part of our next team. And Kelly, if you want, go ahead and open your cam and your mic.
Guys,
hello.
Great discussion. Thank you again.
Thank you.
I have 2 questions, if that's okay. Mo, Lisa, is that okay?
I don't know.
Okay. Just making sure. So I sadly have not seen the film yet. I'm going to have to wait until the summer, but I can be patient. That being said, one of the biggest reactions that I've noticed so far from those who have seen it has been to the sound design. And as screenwriters, I think that sometimes we can put sound on the back burner just because we are taught to think so visually. But given the reaction to The Night House and its sound, I wanted to ask, like, how did the 2 of you think about sound when you were writing the script? And
what's hilarious is the thing that you're talking about that got all the attention, and we can't spoil it, but the beat that is why I think it was David Ehrlich said it's like the loudest one. It's in the script, and it is, we are responsible for them doing, like telling them do this, and they did it, and like
I think it was
sound design
probably louder than we thought even, but even then, to me, it was just, when I remember, because that was at the premiere screening at Sundance, and Ehrlich was in the audience, and we didn't even know that at the time, but I was sitting in the back next to the sound designer, and when it got to some of the more like voluminous like sections, I was like elbowing the guy, being like, yes, this is so good, because like whenever I guess because probably my love of David Lynch, but like in high school even, like I remember, I think he was the one that said he had some quote about how like movies should be like rock concerts, and I'm just like, yeah, like I want things to go from like piercing, overwhelming like white noise like to dead silence. Like I just think it's such a cool part of the experience. So when we're thinking things through, it comes up because it's part of your senses.
Frustrations as a writer, because it's so intangible and hard to describe on the page. But I know for me, because I agree with Ben, I'm very receptive to it, to score and music, from needle drops to like film score to, especially with horror sound stuff. So we do actually write a lot of it in there, but it's kind of frustrating because it's like, are they going to understand what this is supposed to be? But I think, obviously the sound design stuff is, above and beyond, and I think it's all really cool. And
well, it's also just, if you're writing in the genre, and especially if you're writing with any concern to budget, which I think almost everybody does at this point, and we certainly do, it's just another way to have scares in the script that aren't going to be super expensive. So I think in terms of like when you're like imagining the experience of watching the movie as this kind of tension roller coaster thing, it's just another tool that you have that like isn't going to involve building a creature or a special camera rig. It's like you can only have ghostly looking people jump off a cliff a couple times in a movie. It's difficult to do. So it's like you can have loud sounds show up, and they fit in a story sense, and it's not just like like the cat that jumps out of the closet and scares you in a bullshit way, but it's like, yeah, it's just extra buttons to push, and we enjoy thinking of it as like a sort of tapestry of moments.
Just going back to music, I mean, the one thing that I'm thinking of, the moment I'm thinking of, was inspired by Ben playing some very scary music for me driving around in a car at night. So again, I think just music as an inspiration. So I don't know if that like totally answers your question, but
I'm gonna just use the opportunity to drop it though. Like, so it's there. This was many years ago. There's a UK based sort of experimental folk band called Current 93 that released an EP called, I believe it's called Birth Canal Blues. It's a 4-track EP. I'm not going to tell you anything about it, but it's amazing. And I was a big fan of this group, and they do a lot of different weird stuff. It's very weird. And I heard this, I listened to it, I downloaded it, and I listened to it late at night by myself. And it was so terrifying. I think I was driving, maybe even by myself. And I was like, this is so, I was like, I'm not going to tell Luke anything. Luke is going to love this.
2 times. One time with you, like driving through like a Georgia cornfield at like 3 a.m. And then again, it was years later, it was on Halloween, and I was driving to work when I was teaching, and it was dark out. So I was like, it's Halloween, I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna play this for myself. And I was driving and like started to like physically and nearly drove off the road. Like
it's one of those, yeah, it's
the sound.
Luke is such a good, like, you find something like that, and it's like, it wasn't even like we need to make this into something. It was just like, Luke is going to enjoy this so much that it'll feed into the mental gestation process, and somewhere along the line this will come back. I really do. We just started working together, I think it was, or we were about to, and I was like, oh, Luke just needs to have this in his mind. And then yeah, like many years later, it does inspire something that's nice. I'd forgotten about that, but yeah, good question. Did you have another question?
I did, yes. I was wondering if you two could talk a little bit more about the collaboration process moving into production. So for instance, how, if at all, did David Bruckner and or Rebecca Hall influence the story and characters, and hence the script, like did the script change? And were there any valuable lessons regarding compromise that were learned along the way?
That's a really good question. And there was I will say that at once, not a ton changed, but at the other hand, some very specific, very crucial things did change. And so we can't say much, in terms of the spoiler thing, but I will say that it's a tricky balance, and Luke will have a slightly different answer to this, but like in terms of like understanding what your role is when it goes from development or pre-production or whatever, like into actual pre-production or whatever, like, because it would be a mistake to assume your words need to be like obeyed to the letter, like some sort of like a David Mamet or sort of basically just a theater approach. Like, I think that would be a mistake, and some people probably do it, but you run the risk of like, just being dismissed because the director doesn't have to do what you say, but also like if you're too slavish about it to some degree, it's going to be, you might run into a situation where there's a better solution in the moment, or because of a location or something. So you have to stay flexible, but you have to stay true to what the story requires to be what it is. So it's tricky, and there's a lot of different approaches to it. And I think there's, at times, a writer can be seen as like a little bit like pouty or overly protective of their little baby or something. But it's like, you have to thread this balance if you want to stay involved. And I think that because we've done this a couple times with other friends, we were able to be clear with David and say, like, look, whatever you need us for, we're down. Whatever you don't need us for, if you need to like zero in on things, that's okay. And I think there was a healthy balance of that stuff. And Rebecca was absolutely instrumental in some very crucial decisions that I think we all were happy to have her weigh in on. I think for a lot of reasons to feel confident in the material. Obviously, her interest in it was enough of something to make us feel confident, but having her have opinions that made her more interested was only more appealing to us to take seriously.
Was on board, and it was only sort of like, and we never like spoke with her or worked directly with her, but it was sort of communicated.
We would get notes from somebody that was
minor things of just like, that made it better for her, which was great. David Bruckner is like super collaborative and super smart guy. I'll talk sort of vague specifics, but he comes in, he's got a really fascinating mind, and I mean, one of the issues with previous directors, like there's a very different visualization for the haunts, as Dave calls them in the movie, and like there's the big one in the trailer that you do see that involves a movement of a face. Like a lot of the design and conceptual stuff that was coming from Dave, and something that he really made happen, and really things were visualized differently, and then for a number of reasons couldn't end up being that way. And we talked with him a lot thematically about, look, she's haunted by absence. It's the fact that her husband is not here that is scary. And he kind of started to pull at this thread of the idea of, how do we visualize absence? And so that was something that, he guided that towards his vision. The staging of a lot of the scenes, particularly stuff at the end. And then of course you get down to budget and locations too. Like, we wrote this to take place like at my parents' house on a lake in like, middle of nowhere, Georgia. And then we're shooting, up in Kingston. Like, the lake is massive. There's like a huge staircase that like goes down to the dock. It's not just like right there.
Oh yeah, none of that was, we did not imagine that.
The side of the lake was supposed to be like very easy because it's a small lake. It was like, no, we've got this giant lake. So there's so many logistical things too, but Dave's really good about, always having us involved as much as we wanted to be in.
And he tries to understand things from the internal perspective of like both our intentions and our creative process and stuff, so that he feels like he's making choices that are still in kind. Like, I think that there are directors, we've certainly met and worked with some, that start every conversation with the assumption that they're right, and that's okay sometimes. But I think that for a really healthy collaboration, starting from a place of, I think this is what I understood. Am I right about this, or is this an interpretation that is valid? And we, as you can see, Luke and I are very verbose people, and so when we're working with Dave, as we've done several times now, it's like a lot of conversation, picking things apart from the inside and understanding them, so that whatever does change, like I said, doesn't feel tacked on or grafted onto something inappropriately. I think that's the goal anyways.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So we have one more question before we close it out, and that comes from Melody Cooper. So Melody, go ahead and open your typing mic.
Hi. Thank you so much for sharing about your work and your process. I love hearing all the details. It's great. And I love what you said, especially about not imposing genre, and that instead of a movie about an alcoholic and there are ghosts, it's a man who's addicted to ghosts. I think that's especially, I think now we're seeing so many people jumping on the horror bandwagon, and imposing the genre is not always the best way. And I think especially for us as a group, thank you for sharing also about not being restricted to race and gender when we talk about, oh, this is what you should write about. I wrote on a horror show last year where I had Black characters, but in one episode it was specifically Black characters, in the other episode they happened to be Black characters. And so I wondered kind of a few things, but one, if you plan to write, or have you written for television, and what kind of trepidations you might have about that, and what kind of experience you might have had along those lines of working the genre in television. And then you had mentioned theater. I used to be a playwright. I still am.
Cool.
Nice. So I was curious about the influences, thinking about the idea of the tropes of who we are as writers, and writing what your influences are. So whether it's, other writers or filmmakers in theater, I'd be curious to know.
We've dabbled in TV. We had a pitch that ended up not coming together, and then we were in a writer's room. I guess we've been in a couple of different...
We sold a show that didn't. I mean,
right.
we sold a pitch that we developed for like 2 years, but that didn't. I mean, it was a very good learning experience, because it's a huge different thing.
But we're dying to get into it, and like, honestly, I didn't want to work in film. I wanted to be in a writer's room for a television show. Like, that was my dream job, was like a 9 to 5. Like, you just go and like talk with other people, like a jam band, like hashing out stories, and like put it in like, and then you break and you each like write the things together. Like, to me, that sounded so amazing. And a lot of the stuff that I loved, was like long form television storytelling. And still is, and I think it's interesting how the two are really merging. So I would really like it, and I really enjoyed the 2 times we've been in like actual rooms for stuff that hasn't come out yet. One dealing more with, kind of like features, and then one dealing more with something that was intended to be a television show. I don't. They're all sort of up in the air, but it was a fucking great experience.
It was wonderful
to have the share the sense of community and again perspectives. Like, it was so fun to like talk about a single story and have everybody sharing sort of what scares them, or sharing, well, like the one writer's room, everybody's telling these like kind of like really open stories about their relationship with their parents or their siblings, and like everybody had something to say, and it was just like, I don't know, I came out of that like feeling, I don't know, I don't go to therapy, but it felt very therapeutic and I felt connected to humanity, because it wasn't small talk. To kind of go back to what I was saying before, was I actually care and about everything that we're saying, and we're actually creating something together. That's a long-winded way, but like I love that about TV, and I would love to do TV someday.
Yeah, I think we definitely will make more concerted efforts. We I think it is interesting. I think that I think features made sense for us getting in, but it would be really fun because, like Luke's saying, the room thing is amazing and it's wonderful, and I would really like to do that. And what was there was a second question that I'm blanking on.
Influences?
Influences.
Influences. Yeah.
What do we got?
I mean, everything for me. I mean, like, I guess I always go back to my DNA is like, I am a giant nerd, but I studied British literature. So I like to think about things in the same way I was taught to think about British literature, but I like to do that to horror movies or comic books or anime or, whatever sort of nerdy stuff. I like to play the same mental games. I love Shakespeare, and I'll slip Shakespeare lines into shit all the time. But yeah, I also want to, So I guess that's my influences. Is I'll pull from a lot of things. I'll pull from Dickens, but then I also, certainly Stephen King, a lot of Japanese stuff. I was in high school in the late '90s, so like when the anime boom happened, I was very. This is another world of storytelling that is devoid of a context of the world that I know. So it's in some ways pure storytelling that was devoid of a lot of the like baggage, and then also again a lot of the tropes, because it's like, oh, this doesn't play by any rules that I'm familiar with, which is always super exciting to me. And so to this day, Genesis Evangelion is a huge one for us.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's our Demon Slayer.
I've seen a little bit of Demon Slayer. Yeah, I haven't finished it, but I got started.
Or Attack of the Titans is always this, which blows me away. What are your influences, Ben?
That's what I was trying to think. I mean, it's funny because I think Luke and I have, like, between the two of us, we cover a lot of bases, but it is sort of random because, like he's saying, he's probably more specifically into like nerd stuff and also classical, like British, like he's read more classics than I have, but I'm really into like 70s postmodern novels and stuff. I am a big Thomas Pynchon fan, and like Don DeLillo, and I think William Gaddis is probably, I think, the most underrated writer, like underrated American writer, and his fiction has nothing to do with horror at all, but that stuff inspires me just with like the language of things. I get really interested in the way we write, even as almost as much as what we write about sometimes. And so like there's things like that, but then like Luke said, we were both high school theater actors, and that's how we sort of met. And so like I did read a lot of David Mamet and a lot of I don't think who else. What's his name? What's the guy's name? The Shakespeare, not Shakespeare. Well, he did read Shakespeare in Love, but not like Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. Tom Stoppard, like that kind of like theater stuff. Where like because I do think that we're comfortable with excessive dialogue in a way that maybe some genre writers don't like dig into as much. Like I think we like language and we like the way people talk, and some of that probably does come from theater and as much from television and things like that. So I think it's like, it's weird that like I'm probably more of like the cinephile in like the sort of like Criterion collection-y kind of way, because I went to film school. So that means we have like Godard and Antonioni and Bergman are all coming into these things probably more through me but then at this point, Luke and I've been working together for so long that we've cross-pollinated so many things where he's gotten me into this comic book or this thing or that thing, and I've, you know, gotten him into Wong Kar-wai movies or something. And then it's like the influence, there's way too many things to say. There's just so many things, and it becomes, you know, it's a fun grab bag.
A lot of music and a lot of emotional music will sort of drive my writing. You know, and it's funny, you see like a lot of horror guys that are like, you know, into metal or listening to like the scary stuff like we talked about, but like I'll be listening to like, oh, this like really sad acoustic Beck album, like that'll go good with this, or like let me put on the Tori Amos and like get into the zone to write this like super scary
yeah, it's very funny when we compare notes of like what because we write, like I said, separately, and so like we'll each be listening to sometimes like kind of, you know, harmonious things, but sometimes very different things. It's like sort of like halfway through a process of like, oh, I've been listening to this while writing, and it is interesting because it's not always like, it's not like everything is like purely horror focused, you know. It's like you want to kind of have contrasting feelings. You want to listen to Ryuichi Sakamoto while you're, you know, writing a horror thing, because then it's got a totally different vibe, and that's fucking cool, you know. And it's, I don't know, it's fun. It's definitely become like we have to keep consuming stuff so that we have new things to put out. You know, it's like you have to get influences and be inspired by things, or you're just going to burn out so quickly.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Love
Melody.
to see a TV show. I would love to see you guys. I think you'd be great as working on TV.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. We will let you know whenever it happens. I mean, hopefully sometime soon.
This has been amazing. I'm so excited that you were able to join us. I'm so excited for the rest of the team and everyone out there to watch the film. Like I said, you did such a great way of shaping it, and there were a lot of points that we were just like, I'm nervous about that, but you definitely quelled that nervousness, and it was a really beautiful project to watch. I'm really grateful for that.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm really glad you guys could see it, and thank you for having us.
Oh,
absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think sort of, we talked about it before the official call, but like, yeah, I mean, there's no hesitation on our part, and to go back to what I was saying before, I think what you're doing here is very important and valuable, and is the kind of thing that can help. So yeah,
I think so.
A no-brainer on my end to, yeah, we want to, if this will get some eyes and, you know, bring some people into the fold, I hope we did.
yeah, we're glad to be a part of it.
Did awesome. Is there any other projects that you guys have coming down the pike that you want to discuss?
I mean, we've got a couple things that are gonna hopefully film in the next 6 months. So things have been announced, so it's not like we can't say, but we're in pre-production on a Hellraiser movie right now. That's going to be filming in July, Lord willing. I mean, that's what we were working towards right now, and so that means sometime, I believe, in 2022, Luke, right? That will happen, and then we have another project that has been off and on in prep throughout the pandemic, actually. That's been announced, hasn't it, Luke? Yeah,
and they've actually announced, Rachel Chavkin is announced as director. She's the award-winning director of Hadestown on Broadway, is attached to this Spanish remake we did called Shrew's Nest. Super excited about that because she's a theater director. Again, like a totally different perspective of her coming in and doing this really like chamber piece thriller movie. It's going to be so great. It's just with pandemic stuff, trying to make it happen. But yeah, that's been announced, and that's, as far as we know right now, still happening. And could be more jazzed about that. And she's another incredible.
She's incredible, yeah.
Operator, like David Bruckner and Kevin Phillips.
Yeah, we've gotten lucky with directors, and that's a really rewarding part of this. So yeah, those two we're really excited about.
Until it's shot and like edited, like it's kind of weird to say anything about it or like to really look forward to it, because it's sort of like, it's still just an intangible thing. But those two things are super exciting and supposedly happening in the coming years. So
yeah, hopefully soon.
Awesome. Lisa, did you have anything to end with?
No, I just want to say thank you so much. This was great listening to, I don't know, just how you put this thing together. And I will say, I will you know, horror movies, I watch a lot of them. This one terrified me.
Yeah.
At one
I'm still
point, I
terrified currently.
had to get up, and I'm like, I've got to turn on at least one light. So, yeah.
That means we did our job.
We did, absolutely. So, thank y'all for talking with us. This was
of course. Thank you for having us.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. So we are going to close it out. Thank you everyone that joined us today. On behalf of Nick's Horror Collective for Nick's Live, thank you so much to Ben and to Luke. And we'll close it out. Have a great night, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, have a good night, everyone. Thank you. Bye.